Well, good morning. I'm glad you're here today. We're on the second week of a series that we started last week called Life Recovery. You picked a great Sunday to be here because ultimately what we're talking about is what everybody wants. Everybody wants, quote unquote, a good life. And if you want to kind of put a little religious spin on it or something like that, you might call it a blessed life. I would like to live a life that feels like it is blessed by God. Now, the tough part of that is a lot of people mean different things when they say blessed. For most of us, and I'm kind of in that same boat. For most of us, when we hear the word blessed, we think of people that are winning, right? People that are kind of winning at life, but whether it's the experiences they've had or the money they've made or the popularity or the fame or whatever it is, people that seem like they're kind of on the top are the ones that we would tend to think of as blessed. But it's interesting because I read some notes from a psychologist. Her name was Deborah Serrani, and she has kind of an interesting base of patients that she deals with. She only deals with kind of those high achievers. So if you were to look down her list of patients, you would find CEOs of major corporations. You would find very popular entertainers that you would immediately recognize their name. You would find athletes that are kind of at the top of their game, signing the crazy contracts that are making all the money. And come on, let's be honest. They're playing football or baseball for a living. That's not too bad, right? I mean, just me. Okay. I would think it's not too bad. I don't know what there is to be upset about. But anyway, it's these kind of people that she's dealing with on a regular basis. And she said, she kind of made some notes after years of doing this. And she said, what's interesting to her, what she finds it, she says, there's no doubt in my mind that they, her clients, struggle more with depression than the average person. They are constantly comparing themselves to others. And she went on to say that there's this drive, this hyper-competitive drive that they can't help it. They're always looking to see, yeah, but what are they doing? But what is somebody else doing? But who else is getting paid? Who else is getting noticed? Who else got more TV time than I did? They're always comparing themselves. And what's crazy about this, the people we think that are successful, the ones that we say, that's the life I want to live, they're winning at life, are actually feeling like failures because they spend so much time, like I said, comparing themselves to everybody else. They spend so much time wondering why they aren't getting the attention, the dollars, the whatever, that they're actually depressed. Which I know on one level it sounds kind of crazy, but the truth is you've experienced this too, right? I mean, everybody in the room, we've had that thing that if I could just, my life would be, right? And if I could just get this, have that, do whatever, my life would be so much better, so great, it'd be so wonderful. If I could just get through school, my life would be perfect, right? I'd be really excited about that. If I could just get married, then that would take care of everything. If I could just get a house, if we could just have kids, if I could just get a better job, we always have a if I could just. And we think, and in the moment, we feel like if we could get that thing, oh man, then our life would be so much better. Then everything would be calm and good, and I would feel good about myself and good about my life. But it doesn't work. Because most of you guys, you're hard workers, you're smart people, you've applied yourself. A lot of you have gotten those just if I could ifs. You've actually done it. You've actually achieved it. But in many cases, for some reason, life still feels like it's just a little, something's just off still, just a little bit. It reminds me of when I was 8 years old. I wanted, now I'm a Star Wars geek, so I apologize if this is like, you're kind of, what in the world is he talking about? I was about 8, I was with my mom in a store, and they had this thing, it was called the Hoth Ice Planet Play Set. It's basically a dollhouse for Star Wars geeks, all right? And so I was determined that I must have this. And I did what most 8-year-olds do. Mom, if you'll just get me this, you don't have to buy me Christmas or birthday or anything. Just let me do all. If I could just have this. And then I said it. If you will let me have this, I will never ask for another thing. Right? Now 8-year-olds are asking for iPhone 10s, but that's a whole nother deal. And we know they're wrong, right? I mean, we know we would not call them liars, but they don't really mean that because I guarantee you, if you give them the Hoth Planet or the iPhone 10, there's going to be something next, right? It's not wrong to want things. That's a normal thing. As a matter of fact, God put that in you. The reason you want things, the reason you want your life to be a certain way, the reason that you feel like if I get this, then it'll be better and I want it, is because God put that in you. But Jesus comes along and he says, here's the problem a lot of us run into. Our wanter is misaligned. It's not that it's wrong that we want stuff. It's just that we're not always wanting the right things. And that's what gets us into trouble. And so he comes alongside of us and he says, hey, let me help you. Let me show you what you should want so that you can have that blessed, full, meaningful life. Because you know it's not money and fame and all the other stuff that everybody thinks it is. We've seen enough people fail at that. It's something else. Let me help you. You're just going to have to realign your wanter, and you're going to find God's blessing all over your life. And so far, so good. As a matter of fact, Jesus even says, it's good news. It's a gift. You don't have to work for it. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to accomplish something. It's a gift I want to give to you. And so far, like I said, that sounds pretty good. But then he starts listing the stuff that we're supposed to want. And it starts to, I don't know if I want that. We talked about one last week. He said, you need to be poor in spirit. And most of us, we hear that, and we're like, I don't want that. And even though we explained it and said, well, what he's saying is, what he means is, we need to get to a place in our life where we realize I'm not good at being in charge of my life. That God is better at it. I keep running into things. I keep busting up relationships. I keep causing problems. And while I would love to blame everybody else, I know internally part of the problem is me. And Jesus says, if you will want God to be in control, you'll see blessings come into your life. You'll see your life begin to change. And if that's something interesting and you weren't able to be with us last week, I encourage you, just follow us on YouTube or go to the church app. You can watch last week's, because each of these ideas begin to stack on each other. But then Jesus said the next thing. He said, blessed are those who mourn. Well, that doesn't sound good at all. I mean, he's in the middle of this address. He's telling everybody what God says and what it's like to live a blessed life. And he starts off with, blessed are the poor in spirit. And some of us are kind of like, I don't know about that. The whole control thing, I guess. Maybe if I'm having a bad day or something, maybe I should let God be in charge. But then he kind of takes it another step further. And he says, blessed are those who mourn, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 4. And that... Nobody's happy mourning, right? I mean, nobody's excited about mourning. It just doesn't go together, like good life and mourning. Those things don't connect. But it actually could be one of the most hopeful things Jesus ever said, because he said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. That there's more to this. It's not just mourning for mourning's sake, but if you mourn, you will be comforted. And like I said, I know that's kind of a strange thing. It sounds strange to our ears, and I guarantee you, it sounded strange to the people who heard this the first time too. Because if you lived in Jesus' day, as soon as you heard that word mourn, you immediately had this picture in your mind. See, for a lot of us, mourning, we don't even use the word, right? I mean, we don't talk about mourning. We kind of associate it with death, right? We lost somebody, and they're mourning the loss of someone. And again, in our context, for most of us, what that means is you get a day to cry, you have a funeral on another day, and then everybody just kind of expects you to move on. And I know that sounds harsh, but think about it. Isn't that kind of how it goes? Okay, you can be sad. Okay, go to the funeral, but then you kind of need to get back to work and get back to life and go on ahead. That was not what mourning looked like in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, it was actually very expressive. And so one of the expectations is somebody that was mourning, if it was mourning the loss of someone or some great opportunity or some tragedy had happened, when they mourned, they would actually take off all the normal clothes that they wore, and they would wear something called a sackcloth. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a big bag. They cut a hole for the head and 2 holes for the arm, and so they're like wearing the hefty bag, right? They're wearing this. And then they talk about, which again, it sounds kind of like, what does that mean? It said they'd have dust on their heads, and what are they talking about? They lived in the desert. They would literally pull up sand and dirt from the ground and let it fall over their head, over their hair, and over their face, and over the sack that they're wearing. And they would not only wear different clothes and pour dirt over their heads, they would actually moan and groan. They would make deep, painful mourning sounds. And this wasn't a day. In most cases, if somebody died, they mourned for at least a week. They wore these clothes. They were dirty. They were expressive. They just shared their pain. In some cases, when it was a particularly difficult loss, sometimes it would go on for a month or more. And they wanted their mourning to be very public. They wanted people to know, I am hurting, I am struggling, I am at a loss. And they talked about it, that when you see somebody mourning, you should pity them. Not like, oh, they're a terrible person, but pity them. Oh, I see the pain. Because of what they're wearing, because of the way they're acting, because of what's happening in their life, I can see the pain they're feeling on the inside. And so when Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, that's immediately what everybody thought of. I mean, it's much more intense than typically what we think of. And it kind of raises a question. I mean, That's not a good thing. Why would he say that? It's not good to lose stuff. It's not good to feel deep pain. Why would Jesus tell us that if we will want to mourn and embrace mourning, that then we'll be blessed? It doesn't make any sense. And I agree. On the face of it, it doesn't sound like something that anybody would want. And I want to challenge you for just a moment. Let's kind of, he's Jesus, right? So let's give him the benefit of the doubt for just a moment. Let's assume that he is right. What is he wanting us to mourn in the first place? I mean, it makes sense if you've lost somebody, a family member, a friend, or something like that. But if you haven't experienced that recently, what exactly is it that you're supposed to be mourning anyway? This crazy choice that most of us don't want to make, what are we supposed to be making it about? It becomes very clear if you read the rest of this message that Jesus shared, and if you follow his other teaching, he comes back to this topic time and time and time and time and time again. He goes over this almost every time he talks to a crowd. He gets into this. And he says, we mourn sin. And I know sin is a church word, so maybe better, we mourn our failures. But then it's easy to kind of, failure like I did the math problem wrong, or failure like I really messed up being a dad today. I mean, what kind of failure do you mean? Basically anything that has separated you from God. Jesus says that's what we mourn. We mourn sin. And I think that on one level, we kind of, I guess so. If I do something wrong, if I hurt somebody, if I cause some problems, that's bad on me, and I shouldn't have done that. But the tendency is to kind of downplay it, right? Well, I didn't really mean to, and, they took it the wrong way, and hey, I just got to be me, and so, they just got to deal with it. That's the way I am, and, I'm kind of sorry that they're upset, but we kind of try to really play it down when we do something wrong. We don't want to look at it. We don't want to think about it. And so I'm going to ask you to do something this morning that you don't want to do at all. And it's going to be kind of depressing. I promise you there's light at the end of the tunnel, but it's going to be a little discouraging for a few minutes. I want you to think back in your own life. Where have you messed up? Where have you done what you wish you hadn't done? Where have you not done something when you knew you were supposed to? Where were those moments when, if there's anything you could do to get those words back, you'd take them back? If you could not go to that party, if you could have said no to what they suggested, if you could have said yes to the right person at the right time. You see, we all have this. We all have this history. I mean, we have a highlight reel of all the good things that have happened in our lives, and we know that, and we love to play that, and I love it too. We also, even though we don't like to think about it, we want to ignore it, we want to play it down and pretend like it's not there, we have a highlight reel of all the messes that we've made. Whether it's within our family as a parent or a child or a spouse, whether it's with our friends or coworkers, or maybe it's even with strangers. People that we created regrets for them or we became their regret. But we all have this negative highlight reel. And as you begin to think about it, it's not too far of a leap to say, you know what? Those sins, those failures, those things I did that separated me from God, they hurt people. They did. It hurt me. It hurt people I cared about. It hurt people I didn't even know. And on top of that, other people have sinned and failed and done things that separate them from God, and it has hurt me, whether that was their intention or not. What they did and what they said and the way they treated me, that hurt me. That caused me problems. I missed opportunities. It ruined experiences. It caused pain. It created regret. All those things happened. This sin idea, which I know we don't like to talk about it, is very real. I can't really get away from it. And like I said, our normal approach is to kind of be Teflon, right? It's not me. I didn't do it. It's not a big deal. I don't know why anybody would care. They didn't understand. We come up with all the stuff, and we want it to slide off like it's not real, and it didn't happen, and it didn't hurt. And Jesus comes up alongside, and he says, I want you to look at this. I want you to look at it. I want you to feel the weight of it. No, Jesus, you don't understand. I mean, it's kind of like the mourning thing, right? It's like, okay, well, I can be sad about it for a few minutes, and maybe I'll make an apology, but then I got to move on. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And he just gently, but persistently says, no, I need you to look at this. I want you to be broken over this. because sin is real and it's dangerous and it causes deep and severe problems. And one of the things that happens is, and we don't do this on purpose, but one of the things that happens is when we decide, I don't want to do that. I don't want to look at that. I don't want to think about that, and I'm not going to. Think about the exchange we're making. And I've made this exchange too, so I'm not pointing at anybody. But when I am unwilling to look at my sin and unwilling to be broken over my sin and the sin around me and the other people's sin, when I'm not willing to embrace that and feel the weight and the heaviness of it, what I'm doing is saying, I would rather trick myself into feeling good than have the blessing that God has for me. Because Jesus says, if you will mourn, I will bless you. And if we refuse to mourn, we're saying, I would rather trick myself so that I can feel good about myself in the moment than have the blessing of God, than have that life recovered that I really want. I would rather pretend like everything is okay. That's a bad trade, and it's one that's easy to make. And maybe you've made it. I know I have made it. Maybe you have too. And Jesus he's so persistent. I mean, I know it sounds kind of weird. It's like he keeps taking us by the chin very gently and says, but I need you to look over here. I want you to look at this. Because if you will look at it, you'll end up mourning. And when you get to that place where you're willing to mourn over your sin, I can bring comfort and I can bring hope. And I think for all of us, we're at different places, right? There's no universal answer that works for every person in every situation. And so maybe when it comes to this whole idea of mourning, maybe for you, what you really need to mourn, maybe your next step, maybe what Jesus is asking you to deal with is pride. He says, really what I need you to mourn is basically a lot of what we talked about last week. This idea that you have always taken the approach that, God, I got it. I don't need you. I've got it figured out. Now, we aren't that brazen about it, but the way we act and the way we live is kind of like, God's a good idea. I think he's great for the people that need him. I really don't need him, though. I'm doing okay. I kind of got my stuff figured out. And as we figure out our stuff, we keep bumping into relationship walls. We keep bumping into life and happiness walls. We keep finding ourselves struggling with depression, anxiety, and guilt. But on the outside, I've kind of got it all together, God. I am good. And it could be that your step, the thing that Jesus is asking you to look at, is that sin of pride that says, God, I don't need you. I can handle this myself. And he's asking you, are you willing to be broken over that? Are you willing to mourn over that pride has kept you away from me? That pride has driven you to make bad decisions. That pride has tricked you into thinking you can do what you can't do. And all the while, you're pushing me away. Are you willing to be broken over that? And if that's where you're at, I have good news. It's not about where you're at. It's about if you're willing to go to the next place. And Jesus says, if that's where you're at, if pride is the problem, then let me bring the hammer so that you will be broken of your pride. Because that's what it takes to find comfort and to find hope. Are you willing to be broken of your pride? And for some of us, we've made that decision. Matter of fact, a lot of people in this room have made that decision. That, you know what? You're right. God, I can't do this on my own. I need your help. I'm willing to admit that I need your help to do life. And I'm not going to do it nearly as well if I do it on my own as I am if I do it with you. And so maybe your step is a little different. Maybe your step is sin, your own sin. All that stuff we just talked about, all those things I just asked you to think of. To realize that it's really not about making excuses for it. It's really not about trying to justify it. It's really not about trying to prove to other people that even though they called me on it and even though what I did was wrong, that I'm trying to convince them that it's actually okay. That there comes a point where I am finally willing to say, it's mine. I own it. I did it. It was wrong. It was hurtful to me. It was hurtful to the people around me. And maybe worst of all, it pushed me away from my Heavenly Father. And Jesus says, are you willing to be broken over that? Are you willing to feel the weight of that? And understand not only the pain that it brings you, but the pain that it brings others. Are you willing to be broken of your sin? Because if you are, and if you do, you can find comfort and you can find hope. And again, I know for many of us in this room, we've been broken of our pride. We've been broken of our sin. We've gone to God and we've asked for forgiveness, and we've realized that the only way I'm going to do life, the only way that this is going to work is with God in control, and because Christ has forgiven me through dying on the cross, that is my way forward. That is the hope of my life. There's one more step. And I'll be honest, it's probably the hardest one. And it's the one that I think most people would rather not take. It isn't so much that it's hard to get there, is it's just so against our natural tendency. It actually makes a lot of sense when you talk about it, when you explain it. The problem is when it comes to the moment and you're in it, you just kind of go into default mode. And it's the sin of the world. And for a lot of us, it's easy. I mean, we look at it and we think, well, that's somebody else's problem. But some of us are actually bothered by it. And what happens is when we begin to think about my pride and my sin, and then the sin out there that hurts me and that impacts me, or that maybe it doesn't impact me, but I see it. I mean, unfortunately, we've had horrible examples of this very recently. We've seen people shot in shopping malls. We see kids being aborted. We see children being passed over from CPS and foster care and back and forth and getting abused in all those environments. And those things begin to bother us. We see people that can't make enough money to pay for their insulin, and those things, they grind on us. We feel like it should not be that way. That's wrong. There's something wrong with this system. There's something wrong with this situation. And here's where we're in a danger zone. If we're not careful, we will make the choice to go to blame instead of making the choice to go to broken. We want to know whose fault it is. We want to blame somebody instead of being broken over it. And we're great at this. Come on, right? I mean, it's the president's fault. Well, it's the Senate's fault. Well, it's the rich people's fault. No, it's the poor people's fault. No, it's the liberal people's fault. No, it's the conservative people's fault. I mean, we'll go on and on and on, blaming anyone and everyone. It's got to be somebody else's fault, right? It's the white people's fault. It's the ethnic people's fault. We'll do this till the end of time instead of being broken. Instead of looking at it and saying, it's not supposed to be that way. God, it's breaking my heart. Because this is not what you intended for your people. This is not what you created us for. Jesus, would you break me of the sins of the world around me? And something amazing happens. He starts to bring comfort. He brings hope. And it's not that we can't and shouldn't and won't do anything about all the problems that I just mentioned. It's that we go about it a completely different way. You see, we have this concept that somehow it's a government solution, or it's a social solution, or that if we can get enough people to pretend like they're tolerant, or if we can get enough people to go along with something, that will solve all the problems. It won't. It can't. It never has. The only thing that has ever solved any of these problems is the hope of the gospel. That's it. There's no government solution. There's no social solution. We're not going to nice our way into dealing with the sin that Jesus encourages us and really demands us to embrace and mourn. But with hope, it's completely different. You see, the hope of the gospel outlasted the Roman Empire, one of the most brutal and horrific governments that ever was. The hope of the gospel outlasted the Middle Ages. The hope of the gospel outlasted the Renaissance and Reformation. It outlasted Nazi Germany. It outlasted the Soviet Union. It's going to outlast communist China. It will even outlast the United States because the hope of the gospel is built on Christ. It's not built on blaming. It's built on being broken, allowing God to bless us and give us hope so that we can become hope givers to other people. See, that's the solution. That's what Jesus is after, because it would be easy to see all this and say, well, what is he after? What is he trying to do? Does he just want me to make me feel bad? And is that what Jesus is after? Like, okay, I'm a bad guy. I've made mistakes. I shouldn't have done that. And I'm a terrible person. So come on with the blessing. Is that where he's going? Not at all. He wants to give you hope so that you can have this full, blessed life, and that you can then in turn around and give that same hope to other people. Because hope is stronger than votes. That's what changes a society. Blaming people and all that other stuff, and I know I'm railing about political stuff, and if for those of you who don't like it, I apologize. But I want to hold up and make you understand it is the hope of the gospel that will change things. And there's no reason to pursue anything else. And so Jesus lays this out in front of us. He asks us, would you embrace this? And I gotta be honest, it's kind of a hard thing to do. It is. It's discouraging. It's depressing. And there's a couple of things that I think we have to keep in mind when we're facing this. When we're willing to actually enter this process and experiment with this idea of being broken and seeing what God will do in our life. There's a couple of things we got to keep in mind. And the first one is very, very simple. It's that God knows me. God knows about me. You know, Psalms tell us that God knows when we get up and when we sit down. It says that he's kept every tear in a bottle, that he knows our hurts. He knows the times we've done well. He knows when we've failed. He knows when we've excelled. God knows us. And that leads right into the second one, and this is where the hope begins to kick in. Not only does God know me, he knows all the good things and all the bad things, but God cares about me. He cares about me. Even though he knows all about me. He's seen all that stuff. Psalms 103 talks about that God's love for us is bigger than everything you see. Everything that's been created, his love for us is bigger than that. John, who was one of his closest followers of Jesus, I mean, he was right there with him every day. And he sat down and wrote a letter, and he tried to define God. He said, God is, and the best word he could come up with, love. God is love. Paul in Romans chapter 5 is writing, and he's trying to explain how much God loves us. And he says he loves you so much that he joyfully sacrificed his son so that he could have a relationship with you. See, God knows all about you, and God loves you. Those things begin to help when you're in this process of mourning. But then the third thing that we've got to remember and got to hold on to is that God can change me, and he can change my situation. See, this is where the hope really comes. But it comes from a different path than we assume. Most of the time, we assume the path is, I got to work harder, I got to do better, I got to start doing this, I got to quit doing that, and I'm going to make my life better. And Jesus comes along and he says, actually, it's a gift. If you will just want some different things, you're going to find a better life. And the truth is, everybody here needs recovery. All of us need this. This isn't just one person or a few people. It doesn't matter if you're first day of following Jesus, you're not a follower of Jesus, or you've been following Jesus for a long time. We all need this. It applies to everyone. I mean, our sins are all different, right? We all get caught up in different things. And it's not about what is our sin and what is somebody else's sin. I mean, some of us, it's the substances we eat and drink that are throwing us off track. Others, it could be what we're looking at online. For some of us, it's because of the way we deal with our family, that we ignore or we disrespect our family members. Some of us, you got a biting tongue, and instead of building people up, we're tearing them down. The way we get there isn't all that important because we all have sins that we struggle with. The question is, the thing that Jesus is inviting you to do, would you look at him? Would you look at what they do, the pain they cause? Not because I want to beat you up and beat you down, but because then you begin to appreciate the power of the hope and the comfort that he brings. Because if he can fix me, there's nobody out there he can't fix. And all of a sudden, this idea of embracing mourning, which sounds crazy, begins to take on some real meaning. That maybe it is actually a hopeful thing. Now, normally in the message, we take a moment and pray and kind of shift into another part of worship. And today, we're going to do that, but I want to do it in a little bit different way. You see, there was a man in the Bible, his name was David, and he went through this process. And we have the gift of, he kind of wrote it down. Here's what happened to me. Here's how it went through me. Here's how it processed in my heart and my life. And so maybe if you're struggling with, what do I do about this? How do I approach this? I come to church. I want you to make me feel better, and you're kind of bumming me out today. And so what can I do with all of this? Well, what I want to ask you to do is just to close your eyes and bow your head and listen to Psalm 51 as David goes through this exact same process that Jesus is inviting us into, and see if your heart doesn't connect with his. So bow your head, close your eyes, try to listen to this. Even if you've heard it many times, try to listen to it like you've never heard it before. Have mercy on me, O God. According to your unfailing love and according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all of my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. I know my transgressions, I know my sin is always before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what's evil in your sight. You are right in your verdict and justified when you judge. Surely I was sinful at birth, was sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Yet you desired faithfulness even in the womb. You taught me in that secret place. God, cleanse me with hyssop and I will be clean. Wash me and I'll be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness, and let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins. Blot out all my iniquity. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Instead, restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will turn back to you. Deliver me from the guilt of bloodshed. God, you are God, my Savior, and my tongue will sing of your righteousness. Open my lips, Lord, and my mouth will declare your praise. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, God, you will not despise. Let's continue to worship.